Well, like I'm like slowly day by day, I'm like getting more convinced to go in a very specific direction that I won't clearly indicate. But I'm not gonna go on and support someone to the fullest. I'm not gonna attack on Titan like Shinso Sageo, however you pronounce it.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to yet another episode of Zillennial Money. This is episode 33. And I am always the world's greatest podcast host. My name is Andy, and with me are our two usual hosts. So why don't you guys introduce yourselves very quickly to our audience members who might be new?
Yo, what's up, guys? It's Dominic here. So please be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe to this channel, as well as our clips channel. And let's begin.
Hey guys, Tristan here. We've got a packed show for you today, as always. So I'll throw it back to Andy to take it away.
It's become a tradition that we start off with some Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining news. So this week is no exception. We have our first big story, which is Cleanspark. So Cleanspark just recently filed an SEC filing revealing that the company has amended its document to increase the maximum allowed issued shares from 300 million to 600 million. So this kind of sent panic waves throughout the crypto mining, social media space, particularly on X and other social media platforms. People were just kind of panicking because it seems like they're doubling their share count, right? And it's a lot of dilution and stuff like that. And also people were mad that they released it on the Friday evening after market close, right before a long weekend. So it was the Labor Day weekend. So they released it on the Friday night after markets had already closed, before the Labor Day weekend. So, it's not the first time they've released sort of quote unquote bad news over a long weekend. And then that was a large part of, people's criticisms that they have against Cleanspark, and they did it again this time. So maybe the second part of my question is just to ask you guys if you guys think this is a big deal. Should they do that? Should they not do that? And first part is obviously, what do you guys think of the news in general? But before I pass it off to you guys, let me just make a point of clarification in case our audience members don't know kind of the terminology and like the kind of stuff that's said in the SEC filing, because it's all legalese and stuff, right? So to be clear, this document itself, this amendment, does not dilute shareholders in of itself. So what happens is that they were limited to issuing up to 300 million shares, and they had their ATM at the market equity program going. But they're trying to increase the maximum allowed to 600 million, which means that they are like giving themselves permission to potentially issue another ATM and then dilute more in the future. So it's like kind of like the precursor to dilution, but it's not dilution itself. And I forgot to include a screenshot of this. I'll probably put it in post, but I'm not sure if you guys read Matthew Schultz, who's one of the co-founders of Cleanspark. He went on Twitter to explain kind of the reasoning behind this move. And basically he was saying how, again, this is not dilution in of itself. The company is just trying to keep its options open to potentially be able to issue shares to do a deal to either, acquire distressed miners, because what they're predicting is that, in the future, as the hash rate increases and stuff, there's smaller miners who might not be able to keep up, like either in the private space, right? Not just publicly traded miners, but in the private space as well. That, kind of they become distressed, they go bankrupt or is about to go bankrupt. And Cleanspark, once they introduce this, like once they increase the cap, they could potentially do like an equity deal where they issue more shares and dilute shareholders, but at the same time they'll be able to acquire distressed miners at discounted prices. So to an extent, this is not like completely brand new. To an extent, this is what's been happening in the Bitcoin mining space as well. We've seen Bitfarms acquire Stronghold, and we were talking about this, I think, last episode, where we were saying how Stronghold's balance sheet doesn't look good, like their operations look kind of terrible, and a Stronghold was like, if they didn't have this deal with Bitfarms, they were probably going to go bankrupt during this bull cycle, right? So I think Bitfarms kind of maybe took advantage of that opportunity and thought, hey, like, yes, they're not doing well, but we can come in and we have more capital. We can buy their sites and then revamp them, and then make the company better and make Bitfarms shareholders better as well, more well off in the future, because it'll be accretive to shareholders. At least that's how Bitfarms management justified it. So the Matthew Schultz, the co-founder of Cleanspark, was kind of trying to talk the same talk, I guess. Whereas it's like, if the bull cycle goes crazy, then maybe we could like issue more shares at higher prices, and then acquire distressed miners. And just one last note, I think a lot of people were panicking around this, but in my opinion, Cleanspark has done a pretty good job at running the company so far. The management has done a pretty good job. So they haven't like gone up to 300 million shares yet. Like they haven't hit the 300 million share ceiling, but they're just trying to increase the ceiling to give themselves some more headroom if needed. That doesn't mean that they're gonna for sure issue up to 600 million shares, right? So just making that clear. And it's still up to management's discretion and all that stuff. But with that out of the way, I want to pass the question off to you guys. What do you guys think of this news? And then what do you guys think of the fact that they dropped it on like a Friday evening before a long weekend? And like, is that an issue for you, or is that a nothing burger? So I guess I'll pass it off to Tristan first, because he's our in-house Bitcoin mining expert. So Tristan, take it away.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, for the with regards to the releasing it right before a long weekend, I kind of feel like they could have released it basically at any point. The day right before a long weekend, like, what difference does it make? The shares still dropped 15%. I mean, I guess the argument could be that you can't sell because you can't do anything because of the long weekend, but I just kind of feel like it's kind of a null point, because if they released it on market close on a different day, you would have still not been able to sell until the following day. So I just kind of think that is kind of more so a nothing burger. Now, with regards to them being willing to increase their stock issuance, I think it's clear that these Bitcoin mining operations need access to a lot of capital to be able to be competitive in this market. So on that front, I think having access to dilute is a area in which they can use to get additional financing without having to take on tremendous amounts of debt or other routes. So this is essentially a different way for them to get money without putting everything in as big of risk as some of the other routes. So, well, dilution is a large downside for shareholders. The downside, assuming that the dilution is being used to fund stuff that is going to improve the company and increase its profitability, the dilution is basically a negligible point, right? Because if I can now get $50 million from diluting for say, 30,000 shares. And now I use that to go add on 17 exahash or something crazy. I've now essentially turned the cost of that in from the 50 million into a revenue generation that is going to be in the longer term much higher than that 50 million would have been if it was not access. So your shares would gain that difference in additional value that the company now has. So from that perspective, like in the short term, it's not really ideal to have the company diluting. But like, for example, if Cleanspark was to zoom to the moon to like 85, 100 USD a share, something crazy, right? In December, and they diluted a whole bunch, I think that that would be a smart decision from the company, because they're now getting way more money for their dilution than if they were to say do it at like $9 or something, right? So in that scenario, if they were to do 50 million shares, instead of getting let's say they're at 10 right now, instead of getting 500,000, they'd now be getting 5 billion potentially if they were at $100 a share. So this is a scenario in which there can be a lot of value gain, because $5 billion would then go extremely far in this space in terms of building out exahash and that kind of regard and buying other companies. So I think in that perspective, like, I think if you're looking to be a long-term investor in the company, I think that this is not really that big of a deal. I think that where this really comes in as something to be concerned about is if you're more of a swing trader, or someone who's just looking to play this bull run, because depending on when they issue new shares, like for example, if the stock hit $100 and then they announced that they were issuing shares, that would probably drive the price of the stock down, right? So from that perspective, you have to acknowledge that this is an additional potential risk in your short-term play. That being said, if you were looking at like the 10-year horizon for Cleanspark, you'd be looking at that $100 a share and being like, amazing, great job at Cleanspark management. You got so much money for it. That's amazing. Whereas if you're a shareholder who bought it like $40 or sorry, $50, and now you've lost 20% or 30% of your 40% even of your position gain, then you're going to be unhappy, right? Even if you've made a significant amount of money. So it's definitely depends on the perspective. I think for me, I tend to be like, my expectation in general is that these companies are going to dilute to some extent. So I think from that perspective, I think that this is kind of to be expected. So I'm not overly concerned. And I think that this is also a time when, you can get a lot of value from a pullback on the stock price on the fears of it. So for example, like with Bitfarms last year, I remember them issuing an announcement for diluting in like November or something like that. And the stock tanked like 30%. They were down to like $1.20 or something. And I bought several shares. I bought a lot of shares at that time because it was clear to me that they were going to be investing that money on something of value, because I had faith in the management, which meant that in the long run, that short-term dilution would result in a higher amount of gain for me as a shareholder than if they didn't do it. And so on that front, like you can look at these dilution opportunities, these dilution scenarios as a negative, or you can understand that and have faith in the company that you've invested in and the leadership that you've clearly I would hope that you've reviewed to understand what they're planning to do, what their incentives are, and how they are going to be utilizing this additional funding. Because I think it's clear, like if they're going to be spending that money on something, for example, like compensation for the senior management, I'm not sitting here going, wow, that's such a necessary value add, right? But if they're going to be buying another 5 exahash of machines, then I will be much more likely to go, okay, fair enough, right? So I think it really depends on what your perspective is on this trade.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with everything you just said there. And just full disclosure, I bought more shares of Cleanspark on Monday, the day that it was not Monday, Tuesday, the day that it was that the market reopened after the long weekend, and then everything crashed, especially Cleanspark, which went down like 15%. And I went in and I bought the dip because, like you were saying, Tristan, I think a lot of this like kind of negative pressure on Cleanspark is a little bit irrational. Like people are kind of scaring each other on social media, where if they use as you said, if they use this money effectively, then it could be accretive to shareholders. And I've seen people on Twitter being like, hey, like, because a lot of analysts were saying how Cleanspark was going to hit $75 this bull cycle, right? I think that's kind of maybe where the consensus price target is, given that Bitcoin hits like, I don't know, 200K at its peak this cycle. So end of 2025. So people were, a lot of analysts were predicting around a $75 price target for Cleanspark. It's at like 8 now. So if it hits 75, we'll have a good time, right? But people are saying, hey, like that was before they announced this announcement. So after, if they're going to increase their share count from 300 million to 600 million, does that mean that the 75 price target is going to get cut in half? That means that it's only going to be like 30 something dollars per share, because it's like half of 75, right? And it's like, no, right? You're not that doesn't make sense, because you're not looking at the upside as well. You're only looking at the downside. It's like, so if they issue these shares, what do you think they're going to do with the money that they raise, right? Like, do you think they're just going to put it in a bank account, in a savings account? Like, did you think that they were just going to sit on a bunch of cash and like put it into US treasuries? Like, no, they're going to use it to expand their hash rate. So if they double their share count, but they double their hash rate as well, or maybe they more than double their hash rate if they double their share count, because it's a lot of money if they double their share count, right? So if they could potentially even triple their hash rate if they double their share count, then like per share, it still represents more hashing power, and they're still growing their HODL as well, right? So let me just go to the second picture. So you see some metrics quarter over quarter compared to quarter of Cleanspark's Bitcoin production, mining hash rate, total cost of Bitcoin mined. They're all trending in the correct direction. This is what you want to see if you're a shareholder, because Bitcoin production is going up in general. And yes, it took a little bit of a dip, but that's because of the halving, right? Obviously, if you should know what the halving is if you're involved in Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining, right? But the halving happened. The halving happened, but the Bitcoin production did not get cut in half, which means, and why is that, right? Because they're increasing their hash rate while the halving occurred. So yes, like they're mining less Bitcoin per block because of the halving, but then they're also getting more blocks because of the hash rate increase, right? And if you look at the second picture, the hash rate is like almost a perfect like hockey stick exponential increase if you look at that graph. And then the total cost of Bitcoin mined is on a downwards trend in general as well. So all the metrics of Cleanspark are great. And I believe in the management's ability to execute. And lastly, I'll just touch upon like the releasing the data on Friday night again. First of all, like, I don't think they're allowed to release it during market open, or if they do, then it's like, a pretty big like urgent event. And like usually companies don't do that because you can be like flagged by the SEC for market manipulation if you release like big news during market open hours, right? So it's like the people who want to trade like this news immediately. Yeah, as Tristan said, it doesn't really matter that much if if they released it during like a regular weekday after hours, or if they released it on Friday night before a long weekend. Like, I don't see why people are making such a big deal out of it. And from the management's perspective, I think that there's actually a lot of sense in potentially doing this over a long weekend. It's like this news has the potential to make people panic, and high volatility. Although Bitcoin miners are really volatile, that doesn't mean that you should be going out of your way to amp up your volatility even more, right? So the management might have an incentive to not make the stock as volatile as it could be, which means that if they release this news on a Friday night over a long weekend, people have time to read through it and digest it and fully understand it, versus if they release it on like a Thursday night, then like, people have like 12 hours or something before the market opens the next day to digest it, right? So that leads to more volatility. So I think that that's like kind of maybe a defense on why the management chose to do it the way that they're doing it. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, as people are pointing out. And even if it is a bad thing, it's like very, very minor. It's a nothing burger, as Tristan would say. So yeah, that's my thoughts. Let me pass it to Dom for some thoughts, and then we can move on to the next story.
Okay. Sounds good. So if they increased their issued share amount from like 300 mil to, what is it, 600 possibly, but it might not actually be that amount. Does that mean if that goes through and then happens, like shares dilute? And then if shares dilute, what does that mean? Like, what happens when shares dilute again? Or
Yeah, so it's just it's the same as like printing money almost, right? So if you think about it, let's say if if everybody has $100, right? But then the central bank comes in and gives everybody $100 more, but they don't increase the amount of goods and services in the economy. That what happens to your purchasing power of your cash, right? It goes down. So it's kind of like the same thing with shares. It's like they just make a share out of thin air and then sell it into the market, which means that your percentage ownership of the company as a current shareholder will go down, right? Because now there's more shares out there. So it's kind of like it's the exact same as like printing money almost, except instead of printing cash, they're printing shares and then selling it for cash.
So just to add on to that, basically in a vacuum, if they were to double the amount of shares, the theory that it would have the value of the stock is correct, in the sense of like there is now the market cap of the company in that scenario, assuming that the money, they just didn't do anything with the money, and then they just threw it in the garbage bin, then you would have half as many. You would have the same market cap with twice as many shares, which would have the value of the shares. Now, obviously, when you receive a large influx of money from selling shares that didn't exist, that you just created into existence, you receive money, and now you can use that money to buy other things. So in practice, that is where the additional stock price would potentially go up. So you end up with like a scenario where your company the stock has increased as a result of you diluting, even though your dilution has lowered the amount of share, like ownership, as Andy was saying, like the ownership per share, right? Is that, I feel like that might help helping explain.
Yeah,
as well.
maybe a bit. Yeah, that was better. Yeah, yeah, maybe people are just like kind of scared of like the instant sudden decision to do this, but I guess over time it might be better for the company actually. So okay, yeah, interesting. Yeah. I think this time around I'm just like peeping into the information rather than having input. So like what you guys were saying are quite interesting things. So cool.
Well, the big question is, will you be adding more Cleanspark shares?
Well, the thing is, like, I don't have like Simple Premium for transparency, so like converting to USD is such a pain, honestly. So for the right price, I might, but I think tentatively I'll just do Bitfarms and Hive, and then that's it for now. But if things change and Iron and CleanSpark, for example, go a lot lower, yeah, screw it, why not? Okay, only time will tell.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Now let's move on to the second story if you guys don't have anything else to add. And the second story is a Canadian update. So, Canadian politics, economics, it's actually a multi-part story. So, this story comes at you in 3 parts. So, strap in because it's a kind of a long one, but we'll get through it part by part. So, the first part of this story is that Jagmeet Singh, who is the leader of the NDP, who's, if you guys don't know, it's the NDP is the left-leaning socialist democratic party, who is to the left of Justin Trudeau, who's the current prime minister's Liberal Party. They used to have this deal called the Supply and Confidence deal, where the NDP would support motions that the Liberals would pass. Well, that's no more. Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP, has announced that he's pulling out of the deal, and he cited a bunch of reasons as to why. So main reason is like he thinks that Trudeau is caving to corporate greed. That's his words, not my words. Trudeau's, or the Liberals in general, they're too selfish to be able to stop the Conservatives, and they'll, cater to corporate interests. And the Conservatives are kind of surging in the polls right now, so the NDP is kind of like a little bit nervous about that, obviously, as well as the Liberals. But the NDP is saying that the Liberals don't have what it takes at this point to beat Pierre Poilievre, who's the leader of the Conservative Party, and like because people have lost trust in Justin Trudeau, so he's kind of trying to distance himself from Justin Trudeau at this point, I think, where he's pulling out of this deal to like not officially support him anymore. And going forward, every kind of motion will be supported or not supported on a case by case basis from the NDP side. So the NDP will have to evaluate things as they come and decide on whether or not to vote in favor of or against the Liberals potentially. And I think one of the other reasons that he gave was that recently there was a big railway workers strike. I'm not sure if you guys heard about that, but like Canada's a big country. We rely on railways for moving essential, like it's an essential service, right? But the workers, they went on strike, and then the Liberals were not happy about that. And the Liberals forced the workers into binding arbitration to kind of get them back to work. And then the NDP was like, that was one of the reasons why Jagmeet is cited to that why he's pulling out of the deal, because he was on the side of the workers saying that they should be able to strike, and the government had no right to force them back to work. So that was another, like, the recent dispute, and I think that was a long list of disputes that between the NDP and the Liberals, and I think but I think that was the straw that broke the camel's back. So that was that's story number one. And my question to you guys is, do you guys think that we're going to have an election soon, right? Because the Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, has said that, this is great news. He called out Jagmeet for pulling out. He wanted Jagmeet to pull out of this deal, and then he did. And then the next part is, let's have an election, right? Like, Pierre has been calling for an election for a long time now, and apparently, Parliament's in recess right now, but they're going to come back in a week or two from now. And then as soon as Parliament is back in session, Pierre is vowing to file a no confidence motion. And with the NDP no longer officially in support of the Liberals, maybe there is a potential that this motion could pass. Again, like, who knows what Jagmeet will do, but this definitely increases the likelihood that we'll have an early election before the previously scheduled election, which is not scheduled to take place until October of 2025. So my question to you guys is, do you guys think that we'll have an early election? Or what do you guys think of this, news in general of the NDP pulling out of this deal? Do you support it? Does it make you want to vote NDP more or less or the same, or you don't care? And it just what are your thoughts in general?
Okay. I'll take a jab at this. I'll say so. I was watching a few videos about this whole current news event, and I think there was like a meeting where he was speaking on behalf of like a lot of other people, and this reporter was trying to get the question, "Oh, are you?" So now that you officially ripped off the contract, because I think Jagmeet was making that super clear, like, "Oh, I ripped off the contract," repeatedly said it. The reporter was asking, "Oh, would you?" I don't know if the word is insinuate an early election, and what I found in the video was that he wasn't answering like clearly necessarily. He was more so dodging the questions of that. And then even to the point where the reporter was like, "You're not answering my question. So are you gonna start an early election?" I think that was the interview outline. And then I think he was trying to like dodge everything a bit more. So I don't know if it's gonna happen super early, but I see all these articles out and stuff indicating that it might happen before like sometime. When is the actual official election? I think like in the fall of next year or something
Yeah,
like that.
October, and like nearing the end of October 2025. So we're still more than a year out, if it lasts that long. But yeah, I guess we could have an early election now that this news broke, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's always a possibility. I could see it like being, I don't know, worst case like spring maybe. That's just like the guess, but or even winter, who knows? But I don't think it's gonna happen within like the next few months or something. But we'll see like after you're mentioning a recess. And to answer your other questions, if I would ever vote NDP, I mean probably not. I think he he knew there was a lot of issues with oh, I don't want to sound so biased, but like like JT's government and stuff, and he decided to stay and stick by because of his pension. But he basically got like peer pressured out of his current position of like with the contract and ripped it. But yeah, I don't know if people have a good taste in their mouth about that. So I think they might perhaps want to not vote in his direction necessarily and vote elsewhere. But um, yeah, let's see if there's an early election, and I wonder how the NDP is going to do during the election too. So yeah.
In the past, I have been pretty NDP leaning over, particularly over the Liberals. So I will say that in general, I think socially, I tend to be more aligned with the NDP than other parties. But I think that from my perspective, I was very frustrated when Jagmeet announced the deal in the first place, because to my perspective, I had voted at the time. I voted for the NDP, and from my perspective, I had specifically voted for the NDP and not the Liberal. So basically, what it felt like was that by voting for the NDP, I had instead voted for the Liberals, which I would not have done um, if I had unknown that I was going to be inadvertently voting for the Liberals. I may have been more likely to vote a different way, right? But I didn't have the option to decide that for myself. I essentially had to have Jagmeet decide that the Liberals were the ones that they wanted to hang out with. And the fact that I personally wasn't aligned with the Liberals was not a factor. And so from that perspective, I think that my skepticism on the NDP, particularly with Jagmeet as the leader, is a lot higher, because I think from my perspective, I was expecting him to stand on his own 2 feet and push more of the NDP kind of values that I was more aligned with, when instead in reality he was pushing, he swapped to just being a liberal, well, puppet's maybe a strong word, but he's basically just another liberal for all intents and purposes. And so I think that makes me less likely to consider voting for Jagmeet now, because if we're in a scenario again in a post this election where Jagmeet, the Liberals have a minority and Jagmeet's got that little bit that they need to get over the majority, I'm just going to be inadvertently voting for the Liberals again. And I don't want to vote for the Liberals for a reason. So because of that, I think I am less inclined to vote for the NDP now, because of the fact that there's been a clear willingness to align themselves with the Liberals, who have proven to be untrustworthy in the past. And so, at least particularly this Liberal government. So I think from my perspective, I would say that it doesn't really matter that he's broken the deal to me, because he already lost the trust that he had in the first place, or that the party had, is probably the better perspective. Because I was more aligned with NDP prior to Jagmeet's leadership. I was more aligned with the Jack Layton and Tom Mulcair era of NDP, rather than the Jagmeet era of the NDP. So I don't think it matters. He's already proven that he'll be a liberal crony. So whether or not he is currently a liberal crony, it doesn't really matter, because I probably won't be voting for him again.
Yeah, good points. And for me personally, I guess, like, in case you guys, in case we have new audience members, surprise, maybe this will come as a shock. I already endorsed Pierre Poilievre, so I'm going to be voting for Pierre whenever the next election comes. So it won't be a surprise to anyone, to either of you guys or any of the audience members who have watched me for a while. So I feel like I don't have a horse in this race. So, like, obviously I welcome this news that there might be an election. Like, at least it increases the chances of an election soon, which, I've been screaming from the rooftops that we should have had an election for since a long time ago. Because if you look at the polls, it's pretty clear that Trudeau has lost the mandate of heaven, right? Or I guess since we're in a democratic country, it's not the mandate of heaven, it's the mandate of the people. But however way you look at it, the fact that, like, I think we should have some, like, mechanism almost to, like, have a referendum in situations like this, when, like, there's a leader that's, like, become super unpopular for a series of bad policies, but because the next scheduled election is not, like, until a long time out, he's kind of holding the nation hostage. So this is the sense that I've been getting from both Jagmeet Singh and Justin Trudeau, in fact, because of this deal, right? Because it's like, yeah, Trudeau's there because at least you can say that, like, he got the most seats in the last election, and it's like, a vast minority of people voted for Trudeau, at least. But then you have this smaller party, the NDP, who's propping up the Liberals and not letting us have an election, and just kind of rubber stamping everything that the Liberals are doing, because because they want to prop up the Liberals. And I just think that it's kind of like, it's like holding a nation hostage, right? So I'm glad that this deal is gone, but that's not enough. I think what Jagmeet Singh really needs to do is have it's vote no confidence and let us have an election, and let the Canadian people decide, right? And he's been saying this a long time that, like, Trudeau's so corrupt and he's caving to corporate greed, and he's so selfish, and he's such a bad leader. He's blasting him every day on X and on other social media platforms. And it's like, well, isn't it kind of hypocritical that you're propping him up? And even without this deal, if you don't call for an election, it's kind of like you're still propping him up, and you're still like afraid to actually put your ideas in front of the Canadian people, right? Like, if you're so confident in your ability to win, if you're so confident in your ability to deliver a better future for Canadians, then why don't you put those ideas on the campaign trail and let people decide, right? And eventually he's going to have to do that. So either, like, he can avoid it for now, but eventually there's going to be the next mandated election, and he's going to have to explain himself to the Canadian people. And I just think that it's a very dicey road that he's walking down. And yeah, I just think that, like, this whole, like, NDP and Liberal deal has been kind of a disaster from day one, and I'm glad it's finally over, but it's not enough. Let's move on to part 2, which is still about Canada. So this is more along the lines of economic news. The Canadian GDP actually grew by more than expected. However, the real kicker is that real GDP per capita declined for a fifth consecutive time. And on that news, 1 in 4 Canadians now also work in the public sector, which I think we spoke on a previous episode about how the public sector has been exploding here in Canada. Well, now literally like 25% of all employed Canadians in this country are working for the public sector. So I was wondering if you guys think that's a problem or not. But that's kind of part 2. And then part 3 is the Bank of Canada has decided on cutting rates one more time. So maybe this relates to the first thing that I talked about, which is real GDP per capita continues to decline in Canada, and unemployment is starting to tick up as well. So, for a variety of reasons, and by the way, CPI inflation is still at like 2.5%. So it's not terribly high, but it's still above the 2.0 target that the Bank of Canada is aiming for. And yet the Bank of Canada has delivered 3 25 basis point rate cuts already. So this is one of the largest differentials between the Bank of Canada rate and the Fed funds rate. So in the United States, the Fed funds rate is at 5.25 to 5.5%. Let's just call it 5.25. Take the lower bound, but we're like a full percent below the United States now. So, I think a lot of politicians and people who, let's say, support the current administration was celebrating this as a win, but maybe it's not that easy, right? Like, it's not the win that you think it is, because the fact that the Bank of Canada is cutting rates so much maybe signals that they're afraid that the economic fallout and the economic situation in Canada is degrading more rapidly than they thought. So, yeah, a lot of different pieces of news. But I was wondering what you guys thought of anything that I just said. The GDP news, real GDP per capita declining, the explosion of the public sector. 1 in 4 Canadians, 25%, now work for the government or the public sector in some way, or the Bank of Canada rate cut for the 3rd time in a row. So 3 pieces of news. Pick one, pick all that apply.
So I have a buddy who actually works for the government, and he really enjoys it quite a bit and really likes it a lot and stuff. And I feel like they get a lot of benefits. So I'm not exactly super surprised that a lot of public positions are like in favor for a lot of people out there. I think private positions are like hard to get, and then if you apply for the public, if I believe is like government positioning jobs. I always feel like there's so many advantages to doing something or something like that. And yeah, no, my buddy Cedric really likes it a lot, and they treat him really well. So I can see that being the case for a lot of Canadians too, versus maybe private companies not giving you that salary boost that you've wanted because they don't have access to funds like that. But I'll talk about the rate cut next. I think it's quite surprising the deficit between the current rates in the states versus us. I think it's quite surprising. I don't know if our continuous rate cuts are affecting the overall market too much because we aren't the leading currency like the states. So the hope is that for the states to eventually cut rates too during their next federal meeting. That's like the play. But I think as of right now, I want to continue to buy as many assets as possible before that happens because I think the thought is stonks go up once rate cuts go down because big companies can borrow money. So, and I don't know, Canada doesn't really have much of an impact apparently because markets are still doing pretty terribly at the moment. I think we all know that. As of today's filming on the 5th of September, by the way, just to mention that as well. Um, I think real GDP per capita. I don't know how to answer that question super well, but all I can say is that yeah, Canada sucks, and the our neighbors down below are obviously way better in that aspect. So yeah, it is what it is. So here we live and here we stay.
Canada sucks. That is the overarching conclusion.
Pretty much.
Tristan, your thoughts?
I wouldn't say it's necessarily surprising that the Canadian economy grew in the last quarter because of the fact that our immigration is still very high, which means that we're getting lots of money from other places, and more money into the country means more money in the country. And well, that money won't last because people tend to bring a large influx for the original travel in, and then they buy the stuff and then they don't need the stuff anymore, right? Like, you move to a new country, maybe you buy some furniture, maybe you buy some other stuff for your house. But once you've done that, you're not doing anything else, right? You've got the furniture. And I think that is why, we maybe have some more growth, but also at the same time, we can see with that real GDP per capita decreasing, it's just a scenario where the number of people coming in is such that in actuality, everyone has less because real GDP per capita is, divided, the total GDP divided by the number of people, right? And so we have more people, but the amount that the economy has increased is not proportional to the amount of additional people we've gained, which means that each person is generating less monetary value for the country because there are more people now than there were in the past, and the economy is not proportionally larger, right? And so on that front, and I think we can basically, I think we all anecdotally can feel that factor, right? I think we can all kind of acknowledge that, a few years ago, maybe your financial situation was different, but things felt more affordable, right, than they do now. Even if maybe you are making less money, now I feel like, I'm making more money now than I was in the past because, previously I was like a student and such, right? So I'm making more money, yet things do not feel substantially more affordable. Like the amount of money that I was living on as a student would not be enough to sustain someone in if they were a student now, for example, right? And so it really does feel like we've taken some steps backwards in the total amount of money that everyone has, which is very, very much not a good thing. we really need to stop that and slow that descent, because when the average GDP falls, it's not a good scenario. What else? And the number of people employed by the government. Well, the government's growing. It's growing. I'm not surprised that people want to work for the government, because the government is, very good at keeping people around, whether or not, maybe they are the highest performing individual in the world. But from what I hear, it is harder to get fired from the government than from a private company. And I do hear that from employees' perspectives, it's a nicer environment to work in. That being said, I think having a substantial amount of our population working for the government, I do question what work they're doing now that wasn't being done in the past, that is providing a lot of value to the country. Because as we can see, real GDP per capita is decreasing. So things aren't getting better for the average person. Things are in fact getting worse for the average person. And we're at 25% or approximately of people who are now employed by the government. So presumably, like my theoretical would be that the government employees would be providing value that would help everyone in the country. Yet the country is getting worse, even though there are more. So it kind of feels like it's not really actually helping when it comes right down to it. And I'm not sure necessarily what these roles are. So for example, if it includes like police officers, for example, or firefighters or something, like I think we can clearly see the need for a lot of those roles, right? Especially with the level of crime in Ontario and the wildfires that have ripped through Alberta and Jasper National Park. So I'm not 100% certain what all is included in that stat, but I think if this is representing a significant increase in bureaucracy that is providing minimal value, then it is a concerning trend, especially to have it continue to grow.
I guess I'll just provide my opinion quickly, because I think I've covered something similar in previous episodes, so I won't be too long-winded about this. But yeah, I think that it's like what you said, Tristan. It's like a real problem when you like blow up the size of like the public sector, because the public, not to like bash government workers, but government workers tend to be the nature of their work tend to be more administrative in nature, right? Versus private sectors used to be like, at least like usually is more productive in nature, right? So I think that if we blow up the size of the public sector, we have all these like, we just blow up the size of the bureaucracy, and actually we can get into this spiral of like spending more money and hiring, like throwing more resources into the public sector, but things become like less efficient. So the more money you spend, like the less efficient things become, and that's like a double whammy, right? It's getting punched twice, right? Like getting punched in the stomach and then getting uppercutted like on the chin. So like this is definitely something that you don't want, but unfortunately, I think that that's what's happening in Canada. And this is why I think there's such a big issue where you see like the GDP numbers come in, right? And the GDP numbers, they look pretty all right, right? Like the Canadian economy grew 2.3%, which the estimate was only 1.8. So you're like, wow, Canada's economy is doing so well, but it's like if you ask people on the ground, almost universally people are saying that, wow, like I don't feel like I'm doing well. Like it's great that these numbers are coming in great, but like my life is now worse compared to just like a few years ago, right? Like why is that the case? Well, it's because we like blew up the size of the public sector, in my opinion, right? Like the government can just, because when you hire a government worker, that government workers, like the government treats them well, right? And I'm not saying that they shouldn't treat them well, and I'm not saying that like, because I know like it includes firefighters and police officers and teachers, right? Like teachers is part of it. Here in Canada's like a public sector, and I'm not saying we should like not have teachers or not have police officers or not have firefighters, but it's just like a lot of these if we blow up the size of the public sector, a lot of these roles I bet are not the most productive, let's just say, and it's very difficult to like actually fire people in the public sector, because again, it's not like a meritocracy like it is in like cold hard capitalism. So yeah, I just think that that's like, if you're ever wondering why, and it irks me when like the politicians say like, look at our GDP numbers, Canada's doing well, it's best economy in the G7, or I'm not sure if you guys saw that report, but there was like a report, I forget where it comes from, like IMF or something, that said that Canada is projected to grow the most, the Canadian economy is projected to grow the most in 2025 out of the G7. And then all the politicians are like, look how well we're doing. It's like, go ask the people on the ground. And I think that you'll get a different answer. So yeah, this is like a big problem, I think. And I don't know what could be done, right? Like, again, what I think could be done is we have an election and then we have a change of government, and then hopefully like Pierre wins. This is my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'm personally hoping that Pierre wins, and it looks like he will. And then he's going to come in and, cut government spending and kind of tame the size of the public sector. Not like get rid of everyone, right? I'm not advocating for like, again, I'm not advocating for everyone to like get fired who's in the public sector right now. But another issue is that if you look at the polling numbers of the Liberals, they're polling at 25% right now. And what percentage of Canadians works in the public sector? 25%, right? Again, I'm not saying that it's not obviously a one-to-one thing, but it's just, if we blow up the size of the public sector, then you create an incentive for people to vote for, that party that like blew up the public sector, and then maybe that party will do better than they should in the next election, and then and then if that strategy works, their incentive is to continue to blow up the public sector.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on with regards to the efficiency factor. Like, I think one thing that maybe we don't really think about in general is that when you add on more people, things don't get necessarily more efficient, right? And that goes for pretty much everything. So I think a good analogy is like the whole too many cooks in the kitchen. If you have a kitchen of XYZ size, and you have 5 cooks who can cook there efficiently, right? You put on 5 more cooks, that's not going to immediately double the efficiency. Maybe now they can come up with a new system where all 10 cooks are working, doing individual tasks, and it is more efficient than it was, but that it doesn't mean that it will be double as efficient as what it was before. That's not to say that you shouldn't hire additional people, because there's things like having employees be able to take time off. If you have only five chefs and someone needs to take time off, and 4 chefs, and you need 5 chefs to run at peak efficiency, then things are going to be bad. Right. So there's a balancing act in that regard. But I think that a lot of people forget that the addition of additional people is rarely a doubling effect, and is more commonly a a much more marginal increase, particularly the larger you get, right? The larger a team gets, the less the additional gain is from that additional person. And again, not saying we shouldn't hire additional people to get that additional gain. It's just that if you keep increasing in this scenario, if you keep increasing the public sector, we're not going to be suddenly seeing the public sector get way more efficient, but we are going to be paying a lot more for that public sector increase to provide the jobs, etc., for these roles. So in some areas there will be a larger impact, in other areas there'll be less of an impact. So I think it's just important to recognize the fact that it's the increase of people is working in the government sector. And I talked about how when I was talking about like how it doesn't seem to be more efficient, I don't know if it's going to get more efficient. And that's not to say that we shouldn't try to make it more efficient necessarily. It's just to say that by introducing more cooks into this kitchen, I don't think that the end result is necessarily going to be that we get a way more efficient government for a similar-ish cost of the government. And so that's really, I think, the big issue from my perspective.
Even expanding upon what you just said, it's like, yeah, like we should think carefully about adding more people to a team, but at the same time, it's like, I'm wondering where are they adding these people? Because like, for example, teachers, right? Like teachers are public, like are included in the public sector count. But like, if you talk to any teacher, like they'll say that they're understaffed and like, they're overworked and understaffed, and like they could actually use more people. And like, if you actually sit down and talk with the teacher, I think they'll be able to convince any reasonable person that like they could use more help, right? They could use more people. But it's like the government has somehow, the Canadian government has somehow managed to blow up the size of the public sector and still understaff teachers at the same time. So I don't know. Like, and I know like people will be like, hey, like education is a provincial responsibility, like, and you're talking about like federal responsibilities. Like, listen, like this like teachers experience is not like just sectored into Ontario, right? Like it's an issue that's like, if you're gonna say that it's a provincial issue, then there's clearly a provincial issue in every province. And if that's the issue, then maybe we should have a talk about we should maybe like nationalize the education system instead of tossing it to the provinces. But maybe that's another topic. But I'm just saying, like, I think people put way too much emphasis on like provincial responsibility versus federal. And it's like, if there's a will, there's a way, right? Like we established this system to segregate the, duties, right? Which duties are for provincial and which duties are for federal. And if it's not working out, then we have the power to change that, because that's a man-made thing, right? So yeah, I just think that there's a lot of like issues that we're facing in Canada right now, and the size of the public sector is definitely one of them. So that's all I have to say on that. We can move on to the final part of this story, if you guys are ready, which is related to what we've just been talking about for the past like half an hour. So I wanted to highlight this Trudeau's visit to Sault Ste Marie. So Sault Ste Marie, if you guys don't know, it's a town in northern Ontario. It's right by like Michigan, I think. It's like across the lake from Michigan, if you guys have a rough idea of where it is. And it's like a very industrial town, and there's like mining and like, factory work and stuff like that. So Trudeau wanted to kind of increase its popularity, because I think that like it's kind of like a swing district. It used to be Liberal supporting, but now it's like kind of a toss up between the Liberals and the Conservatives, because people are getting mad at the at Trudeau and at the Liberals. So Trudeau thought that he would go there and kind of smooth things out a little bit. So he went to this steel plant where he was talking to the workers. And then this worker wearing like a union shirt came up to Trudeau, and it was kind of a tense exchange, to say the least, right? So, people were saying that this steel worker was rude to Trudeau, but I actually, like, if you watch the video, I don't think that he was rude at all. I think that he made his points fairly clearly. And he was just expressing his frustrations at Trudeau. It's like, hey, like, what you're doing is not working. Okay, so and he was like, I don't think that we should elect you for another 4 years because it's going to be a disaster. And I don't think that you're going to be prime minister a year from now. Like, basically, like, he's just very direct with Trudeau and, not hiding his emotions. He's really making Trudeau listen, like, feel his frustration. So some of the things he said. So the mill worker was saying how he's paying 40% taxes and pays for his own dental care. So one of the kind of landmark programs that Trudeau put out was this dental care program. And, unfortunately, it's not eligible for like most people, right? Because I think right now, maybe they've like expanded the eligibility, but last time I checked, it was only for seniors over 65 or children under the age of 14 or 12 or something, or if you have or if you're an adult who has a disability. So it's only those kind of three categories that's eligible right now. So he's like, it's great that you're putting out this dental program, but I'm not eligible and I have to pay for my own dental care. This is what the mill worker said. And he's saying that he's paying 40% taxes and still kind of, struggling to get by. So I posted this story on X, and I actually got a few like people pushing back against me for resharing this story. Who, like, I don't know what their motivation is, but basically people were saying that this is misinformation because you don't pay 40% income tax until you're making about 270K a year, and there's no way a factory worker, a mill worker, is making 270K a year, right? So he clearly is probably making a lot less than that. So there's no way that he's going to be taxed at 40%. And dental care is covered by his companies or by the union. So like he doesn't pay for his own dental care. So I have a few like choice things to say about that, but maybe I'll reserve that for a little bit later. And let me just pass the question off to you guys first. First of all, did you guys watch this video? Or if not, did you guys at least like read about this story when it first came out? And what are your thoughts in general about what this gentleman said to Trudeau, like the 40% taxes thing, the paying for his own dental care thing? Do you think that his frustrations are justified, or do you think that he's just misled by Pierre Poilievre and by the Conservatives? Because that's an argument that I've heard from people who are defending Trudeau, saying that Pierre is like done all these, like said all these lies and misled people with misinformation. You're not taxed at 40% unless you make 270K, blah blah blah, right? Like, do you think that, like, do you stand on that side of the argument, or are you more on the side of the worker? Is like, hey, like maybe he is paying a lot of taxes and his own dental care, and like maybe Trudeau's doing a bad job as prime minister. So I don't know. A lot of opinions. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'll give it a go first. So basically, to be clear, I haven't. I think I briefly saw this article somewhere somehow, but I don't remember clicking it or watching this video. But point being is that I'm sure, like, while he was explaining and having a conversation with Trudeau, I think if he was trying to like convey his, like emotions or his points, some people can get caught up in that specific moment. I'm sure he was trying to be as civil as possible. And if you have a lot of thoughts and emotions that are going through you, and obviously, judging by the way you're putting everything, he must have been super frustrated. Could have pretty much just got his facts mixed up. I'm sure there's like some sort of truth as to what he was saying, but maybe the 40% may have been a little extreme. He probably just pulled that number out of his ASS. I'll keep this PG. But I think point being is he's primarily frustrated, and I think the idea for him is he just wanted to show his frustrations and his I had it up to here mentality with Trudeau, and I'm sure he tried to explain that as best as possible. But much as how we're talking on this podcast right now, and sometimes we're just speaking on a whim, like, and we're trying to communicate with our brains. I'm sure he was just trying to figure out words to come out, and he might have went home that day and like, oh, I should have said this. Oh, I think I made a mistake for this, and it was just pure coincidental. Like, and yeah, arguably it could be because of the media he's been watching. Like, I don't know if it's like specifically conservative media, but whatever media is watching could have been swayed differently. That's an arguable debate, but I think I have to watch the video, but I would probably just say he was just stirred up in the moment and he was just trying to figure out how to say what he wanted to convey. And some things didn't come out clearly, but you can chime in on that.
Yeah, actually, there's one last part that I forgot to include about the mill workers' arguments against Trudeau. He also said that he can't find a family doctor, and like he's kind of blaming it on Trudeau. And that was another thing that people on X kind of pushed back on, where it's like healthcare is a provincial jurisdiction. So people were saying that he should be blaming Doug Ford for his non-ability to find a doctor. So maybe you can comment on that as well, Dom. Like, do you think that he's justified in saying that to Trudeau or blaming Trudeau, or should he be anchoring the majority of his blame on the family doctor thing on Doug Ford, who's the premier of Ontario?
Well, to be fair, I think the vast majority of people, like, let's just use the Pareto law as an example, like 80% of the population really cares or like understands how the political systems and like policies really truly work. So or sorry, 20% of people really understand, and then the other 80% of people don't really care. So he must be that 80% of people who don't really care. And as someone who doesn't care too much and doesn't look into things too much, the first person you would probably blame is JT, just because he is, I guess, quote unquote, head of the house. He may not know that Doug is the one who's responsible in Ontario. So, and conveniently, he's speaking to Trudeau right now. So he probably wanted to convey his thoughts in regards to that too. Yeah, people have to work, provide, like food for their kids or stuff like that, pay for their mortgages, pay for their rents. So I don't know if people have the willingness to have some downtime to understand how our government works. So I guess that was just the first finger and person he wanted to point towards. But yeah, no, maybe the government itself could find ways to maybe lax up a little bit on, oh, you need to have this in order to become a doctor, a family doctor in Canada. It could ease up the restrictions and things like that. But yeah, I think that's basically what happened. He just didn't read up enough, and he just started to point fingers at JT without knowing the whole. He basically read the first few pages of a book, but he didn't read the entire book, kind of thing. That's just the assumption, pretty much.
I maybe well, okay. I'll say that I think your perspective, Dom's perspective of that he maybe didn't read up as much on this to get the exact stats. I think that's probably true. I doubt he looked into this extensively, but I think that the statement of I'm paying 40% taxes, I think is an example of one where people are looking at it and going, oh, that's clearly false because your income taxes are only going to be, you'd have to make $250,000 to be paying 40% income taxes. But I think they also forget that we pay taxes on just about everything. So coming to that 40% mark becomes a lot easier when you say you pay 30% in taxes or 25, but I think 30% is a pretty reasonable number because if you're making a 50,000, I think that it's around 30%. the likelihood that you're coming up with that additional difference in so in Ontario for 52,000 it is 27% tax rate. So to come up with the 40%, you only need to come up with 13%. And so 13% of $52,000 is what? Let me do some quick maths. 52,000 times 0.01, no, not 0.013 is $6,760. If you're paying 13% taxes on stuff, you're going to get a lot closer to that dollar amount, in an annual, buying your groceries, paying your other things, then I think we are really taking into account, because again, the taxes that we pay are not just the income taxes. So any taxes that you're paying on that 13%, that's additional money. And so maybe it's not actually 40%, but it becomes a lot closer to 40% once you start taking into account that kind of factor. And again, I'm not saying that his numbers are 100%, but I think that it's important to take into account the fact that he will be paying more in that instance either way. And then there's also the fact that there's other things that technically aren't taxes, but I think can feel often similar to taxes, like EI and CPP, for example, where those are things that you have to pay into without your own volition, that you time, which is another area in which you will be seeing your take-home pay feel like it's less money. So I think that his concern is fairly real. I'm not saying that the 40% is 100% accurate. I'm just saying that I think that it's easier to get closer to that figure once you start taking into account other things that you're paying taxes on. And so I think that a lot of the people on Reddit, for example, or an X, I guess that was for this one, who are saying, oh, you wouldn't get there until you made 270K. They're forgetting the fact that there are a lot of other things that you pay taxes on that will be bringing you closer to that 40%. Again, I don't think in this scenario, depending on how much money he's making, I don't think he's necessarily paying 40%. I'm just saying that it would be likely to be closer to 40%. And at some point, this guy's most likely just rounding, right? He's not necessarily going to be saying exactly the amount of money he's paying specifically on taxes. He's just estimating, right? So I think on that front, I think people getting angry about him saying that, I think is not really, it's not really super fair in this instance, because of the fact that he is his concerns are real. We do pay a fair amount of taxes to live in Canada, and so I don't think that we should be just going, oh, he's just lying, he's making stuff up, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Because I think that I'm not saying that you were doing that, Don. I'm just saying, like, I don't want to seem like I'm calling you out or anything, but I am mostly referring to like the people on X who are like 270,000, because I think that those ones are extremely unfounded, and and even if you bump up the salary, like depending on what he's actually making, let's say he's making like 75,000 annually, that's going to bump up his additional tax bracket for some more of his income. And as you just keep walking up that level, you will be paying more percentage wise of your income into the taxes. So depending on how much this steel worker makes, you know, and it can feel like that. So I just think that's something we should be cognizant of.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you there. And just to add to what you just said, I grabbed this screenshot from a research study from the Fraser Institute, and this was done in 2022, where they found that in 2022, the average family, including unattached individuals, earned a cash income of 106,000 Canadian dollars. And then they paid a total of 48,000 dollars worth of taxes. And then if you look at what it includes, is the paragraph above. Of course, income tax is the big part, but it also includes payroll taxes, health-related taxes, sales tax, property tax, fuel tax, carbon tax, right? That's like a new one that the Liberals just added. And I think that that's maybe part of the reason why people are so mad. It's like, oh boy, another tax. And yeah, this all of this added together, this means that the total tax bill for the average Canadian family in 2022 amounted to 45.3% of household income. So it's actually even higher than 40%. It's 45%. Again, this is a study, and I think if you actually crunch the numbers, if you crunch the math as to how much taxes you're paying, then like you'll get close to that 40% number that the mill worker said is not outrageous at all. And also keep in mind that there's like with things like the carbon tax is baked into a lot of stuff, right? So this is one of the things that I was trying to point out and why I'm against the carbon tax when it first became a thing, is because let's say like you implement the carbon tax and anything that emits carbon, you're going to tax it. Well, great. Well, what emits carbon? For example, diesel fuel, right? And if you're going to fill up a truck that transports goods, like groceries, for instance, to the grocery store, that's powered by diesel. If you raise the price of transportation for the groceries, what do you think is going to happen to the price of the groceries, right? You're going to pay more for the groceries, and that's not a tax because like it doesn't show up on your receipt as a tax. It's baked into the price of whatever you're buying from the grocery store. So you don't think that is a tax, but it is because the price would be lower if the people who are transporting the groceries didn't have to pay the carbon tax. So this was kind of my point that like I think people are not understanding the secondary effects of all these taxes. And if you actually try to add up all the things that you pay that is like tax related, right? Like, and I'm including things like CBP and EI, like Tristan mentioned, right? Which are not called taxes, but they are taxes for all intents and purposes because it's like something that you can't opt out of and it gets deducted from your paycheck. So if you add up everything, it is around 40%, I think, and it's not outrageous at all. And even if it's 35%, like what difference does it make, right? Like you're going to give them crap for saying 40% when in fact, let's say it's 35%. Does that make his arguments unjustified because the actual number was 35%, but he just rounded to 40%, right? Like, where do we draw the line? That's kind of the question as well. And Tristan, you didn't respond to the part about the dental care and the family doctor. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to respond to that. So the mill worker was saying that he pays for his own dental care. So, to hell with Trudeau's dental plan. And he also can't find a doctor, which people are mad that he's blaming Trudeau for it when he should be theoretically blaming Doug Ford for it. So what are your thoughts on it?
Right. Yes, I did forget those. Yeah, with regards to blaming Trudeau for the doctor thing, I think that it's pretty difficult to say that Trudeau had no impact on the doctor thing because regardless of, whether or not the healthcare system is Doug Ford's responsibility or not. If you bring in 1 million people and don't increase the number of doctors, you're going to have less doctors for the people. And it's just math. At some point, the numbers don't lie. So on that front, I think that you can blame Justin Trudeau for the lack of doctors because of the fact that actions that his government has taken have effects that will impact other areas, such as, for example, that the doctor piece, right? So, and I don't think that it's fair to just give Justin a pass on that one and blame Doug Ford for not having more doctors when, it wasn't Doug Ford's control over how many additional immigrants were going to come and settle in Doug Ford's province that he now has to find doctors for. And again, then that's not to say that Doug Ford hasn't done things wrong, to be clear. And it's not to say that he's even necessarily doing a good job. It's just to say that the argument that Justin Trudeau has no impact on this is completely unfounded. There is definitely, his actions have meaning and have had an effect. And so I don't think we can discount that factor when we're taking into account a issue that we see in the country. And I think that from the steelworkers' perspective, that is why, calling out Justin Trudeau for his failings is a route that he can take. He's saying that he can't find a doctor. Yeah, it's still Justin Trudeau's country that he can't find a doctor within. So it's not whether or not Justin Trudeau wants to pass the blame over to someone else, or people want to pass the blame over to Doug Ford as to why there's no doctors, doesn't change the fact that there's no doctors, and doesn't change the fact that this is the country that has been created and not created, but like run by the Trudeau government overarchingly for many years now. And then with regards to the dental care, I don't think most benefits cover all of dental care anyway. So the fact that he's paying for his own dental care is not really that surprising. Like, I have dental coverage and I still end up paying at least part of my dental care. And in my experience, these dental care policies that they have created, yeah, I'm sure some people are benefiting from them, but I don't think that the majority of people are benefiting from them. And that's, I don't know if that's a failing in the system itself. I don't know if this is user error. Are people supposed to be doing something that they're not, and that's why they're not getting the dental care covered? I'm not sure exactly what the issue is, but at the end of the day, I don't think that I'm looking around and at our dental care situation and going, this has been resolved. Everything is perfect. So I don't think Trudeau being ridiculously proud about his dental care is really, much of an area where he should be displaying such pride.
For the first time in a long time, Tristan, I think we've agreed upon every single point in every single story that we've covered tonight, which is rare, actually, right? So I have to say I totally agree with everything you just said. And just to quickly add to it, because we're running low on time, but the dental care part, like, even if like he's taking advantage of the benefits that's provided to him by his union and by his company or whatever, like, ultimately that money gets deducted somehow, some way, shape, or form from his pay, right? Because like that benefit, like, it doesn't just come out of nowhere, right? So it's like it's just coming out of like deductions and stuff from his paycheck at some point or another. Or if he's part of a union, like he's paying union dues, right? Like you have to pay union dues. So like where does like, or otherwise where does the union get their money for stuff, right? So that's what I have to say to that. That ultimately, like, you know, he is paying for it. And the fact that he can't find a doctor, whether it's Justin Trudeau's fault or whether it's Doug Ford's fault. Look, like if you want to blame Doug Ford, go ahead, right? And I've seen a lot of like credible articles and credible research studies and stuff that's saying that, like, you know, Doug Ford is actually doing a bad job at running the healthcare system in Ontario. Fine, but if it was just Doug Ford's issue, then shouldn't it be better elsewhere in the country outside of Ontario? Because Canada is not just Ontario, right? Like you guys live in Alberta, and as far as I'm aware, it's like it's not that easy to find a family doctor in Alberta either, right? And you're saying like people are saying, oh, Alberta's run by a conservative premier. Fine, then like go to some like, you know, go to like Manitoba, who I think has a NDP premier, or go to BC, right, who also has an NDP premier, or go to like Newfoundland, which I think has a Liberal premier. So like if you go to other provinces, they're also like experiencing a doctor shortage. So I think that it's a little ridiculous to like say that you can't blame Trudeau, that you have to blame Doug Ford, just because it's Ontario. Like this issue is more than just Ontario; it's a national wide issue. And as to exactly why I think Trudeau's doing a bad job at the doctors thing and what he should be doing, but he's not. Look, like I talked about this in the video where we talked about the 2024 budget, where he's raising the capital gains tax, and there's no exemption for doctors who run their business as a small business. And I think that that's like just one example of an issue where, you know, we're not like incentivizing doctors to stay in Canada, because if you're a doctor in Canada and you're like, oh, I run my practice as a small business and the government's going to raise my capital gains tax and raise my taxes left and right, I could go to the United States where I pay less taxes and I make more in the first place. Why would I not do that? So I think that that's what a lot of people are deciding to do, is to go to the US or go to elsewhere, just not practice medicine in Canada. And that's like a huge contributing factor, right? And as Tristan also mentioned, the immigration thing, I think that that is also has a super big negative contribution to the medical space, where you just have more people. Of course, you're going to have less doctors to go around if you just have more patients in the first place, right? So I think it's a multitude of issues, and I think that the mill worker is completely justified in pretty much almost all of the things he said. I can't really find a big point of disagreement on where I think he was being unreasonable. Now, to wrap up this story, we've covered, you know, the Canadian politics and economic news in three parts. And I've said already that I'm endorsing Pierre Poilievre for the next election. Now, Tristan, you went on a whole like tirade about how you don't like the Liberals. And then now the NDP's like kind of lost your trust as well. And now you're skeptical. So does this mean that we have a committed voter, or would you still classify yourself as uncommitted? I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this.
So I do want to, before we get into that, I just want to say that I bet you the dental benefits from the mail worker, I bet you those are taxable benefits, just to add to his 40% tax figure. Sorry, I just really wanted to say that. Am I committed to voting for Pierre? I would not say I am committed to anything currently. I am still undecided. I think it's clear from my perspective. I think it's a scenario of you know, where would I like to stake my flag? I think at some point you have to you have to decide what is really the most important to you. And I think I'm still on the fence on what is exactly going to be the most important to me, and that will be what has to dictate my vote. And so on that front, I think it's clear that I have expressed my displeasure with the Liberals. I've expressed my disappointment and immeasurable disappointment with the NDP and how they've ruined my day. But I think at this point, I don't want to definitively say that I'm going to necessarily go one way or another because of the. I think Pierre is not necessarily the most likable candidate overall either. He's got some issues, so I think it's all as well, a question of whether or not that is going to be enough to dissuade me over his some of his unlikable factors over his other factors, right? Or if this is just a scenario where I have to vote based on the lesser of the evils, and once I've determined which I would consider the lesser of the evils. So I'm not necessarily, and I think that part of that is maybe we just haven't had a session where we've roasted the crap out of Pierre. We've had a lot of instances where we can roast Justin Trudeau. We've had a lot of instances where Jag meats come up as roastable, but Pierre has been relatively squeaky clean, at least on this podcast side, particularly since most of the things that I would say that he's done that were more on the controversial, egregious side were prior to us starting the podcast. Right, like his support of like the trucker convoy, for example, is something that was quite controversial, whereas that happened long before we started this podcast, so we didn't go and talk about all of that, and something controversially did, whereas we've had a lot of ammunition for the other two.
Right. Yeah, maybe we will dissect that at a future point, some point in the future, because I think it is also worth maybe like revisiting, because like my initial reaction to the trucker protests are very different than my later reactions, right? So just to be clear, initially I did think that they were like, being rude and being like a nuisance. But then later on, as I thought about it, and I saw this was before Trudeau did the Emergencies Act to try and freeze people's bank accounts. I think that when he did that, like that's where it went too far, right? Like I understand that the truckers were being disruptive and like, honking their horns at night when people are trying to sleep and all that stuff. But I just think that like the reaction to it from the Trudeau administration was just way, way overboard. But we'll talk about that another day. Now, before we end the show, Dom, don't think that you're going to get off so easy, because I'm going to ask you the same question. Are you a committed voter, or what are your thoughts on who are you going to vote for when it comes to the next election?
Am I allowed to plead the fifth in this country? Well, like I'm like slowly day by day, I'm like getting more convinced to go in a very specific direction that I won't clearly indicate. But I'm not gonna go on and support someone to the fullest. I'm not gonna attack on Titan like Shinso Sageo, however you pronounce it. So as of right now, I'm undecided, but we'll see as time progresses. Maybe in the year 2025, I will just say that.
Or maybe we have an election a lot sooner than that. Who knows, right? All right. Well,
True.
We did have one more story, but we're out of time, so I think we'll just push it to next week. So why don't we end here if nobody has anything else to add? Great. So let me pass it back to you, Dom, for the outro.
Okay, cool. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. I'm sure we did. So with that being said, leave a like, comment, and subscribe to this channel, as well as our clips channel. And with that being said, again, peace out.
Have a good one.
Thanks for watching. See you next time.